Good morning and Shabbat Shalom. I wish I could say right now how good it feels to be together with all of you right now in the sanctuary. But I can't. Still, it's good to be together this Shabbat morning. But virtual is not the same as in person. I miss Shabbat mornings in our temple. I miss smelling the coffee as I walk in. I don't drink coffee. My job every morning is to wake up and make coffee for my husband so he can then wake up. And I don't quite understand the importance of coffee in his life and in the lives of so many of you, but I love the smell of coffee. I miss the progression of the Torah scrolls. I miss being present as the Torah is read, as we celebrate a bar or a bat mitzvah. I miss the comfort of our community when we grieve. I miss the people who fill this space. I miss the laughter, I miss the conversation, I miss the food, and I miss the mishigas. This is not an easy time, and yet the temple is still here for us. It's been here for me since I arrived in Rochester 27 years ago. I still feel like a kid from Boston, newly arrived in Rochester, but I've come to see over the years that I'm not a kid anymore. And I'm not new to Rochester. When I showed up as a new professor at the University of Rochester, I joined Temple Bethel. Why did I join Temple Bethel? As someone who had just moved to Rochester? Well, I'd grown up in a synagogue community. It was something I had learned from my parents. And I was writing a book about synagogues and churches, which helped me understand the value of them for community. And I was immediately welcomed to Temple Bethel. Fred and Anita Duche were parents of a friend of mine from college, and they immediately brought me into their home, and I would celebrate holidays with them. The Goldsteins, the Savadoffs, had me to their homes for Shabbat dinner. Rabbi Cantor brought me into his office multiple times, and we would have conversations. I remember one time he was recruiting people for the men's club and trying to understand why younger people weren't joining the men's club. And so we have been struggling with that through the years. I remember Enid Ryan recruiting me for something she called the Matzah Ball, which was for Jewish singles on Christmas Eve. I remember being stunned, being amazed by the quality of the temple's records, by the early minute books, and as a new member, new to Rochester, pushing the temple to create an archive, and then finding myself in charge of this newly created archive. The temple matters to each one of us. That's why we're here this morning. That's why we're participating in this service. That's why we support the temple. Some of the happiest days in our lives have taken place in this temple, and some of the saddest days. And mundane, day-to-day interactions that knit us together into a community have taken place in the temple, and once this pandemic passes, will again bring us all together in this temple. This is where we have our B'nai Mitzvah, our weddings, our funerals, Purim parties where we get drunk on Purim teenies, Hanukkah parties. Even in the midst of the pandemic, the celebration of Hanukkah over 8 nights as we drove through the temple parking lot and felt again that sense of community that sustains us even in challenging times. Shabbats, committee meetings, religious school, all these things bring us to the temple. And that's why I'm here today, to talk about this program, Life and Legacy. A year ago, I was sitting in the sanctuary when Debbie Goldberg talked about life and legacy. And I remember Debbie saying, when she first heard about life and legacy, her reaction is, what does this have to do with me? This is about old people. This is about people writing wills and planning for what happens after they're gone. And as I listened to Debbie and Debbie started explaining why it was meaningful for her, I started thinking too. I don't think of myself as an old person at all, but Charles and I are thinking about wills. We are thinking about what would happen the day after we're gone. And so as Debbie talked, I thought about what did life and legacy mean for me, and what did it mean for Charles, and what does it mean for all of us who value this temple? And I actually went home after services that day, and I had been at services. Charles wasn't there, so I get home, and I said, hey, so this person spoke at the temple about this program where we make a commitment. We make a commitment now that we will include the temple in our will. And life and legacy, you can include other Jewish institutions in your will also. I said, is this something we want to consider? Because Charles and I had put a will together recently and have our nieces and have our nephews in the will. But we hadn't thought to put institutions in the will. And to my surprise, though I shouldn't have been surprised, Charles immediately said, yeah, we should do this. And he and I began talking about this life and legacy program, and we realized every year of our lives we give to our community. As I look out at all of you, and it's actually honestly rather hard to see you all because we're not all in a room together, but as I imagine looking out at all of you, every single one of you values the temple. Every single one of you values the community that we gain together through this synagogue and through this congregation. Every single one of you already gives to the temple. You give money, you give your time, you give your spiritual energy. So what is life and legacy? Life and legacy is saying, this is something that has mattered to me every day in my adult life. This is an institution that I value. This is an institution that is here for me and a group of people who are here for me. Life and legacy says, if it matters to you now, then doesn't it matter to you also, at least a small piece of what you leave once you're gone? Shouldn't that institution be something that matters then? And so there and then, after Debbie spoke at services a year ago, and I came home and I chatted with Charles, there and then, Charles and I decided, why don't we sign up for Life and Legacy? It turns out it's not hard at all. There's a form, you put your name on the form, you check off Temple Bethel, you say, I commit to including this congregation in my will. They don't ask you how much money, that's up to you. They don't ask you to do this immediately. You have a year to do it and to put it in your will. But what it is it's a statement. And the interesting thing is once Charles and I decided we should include Temple Bethel in our will, we then sat down and thought about other institutions that we also care about that hadn't even occurred to us you could write into a will. And so it created this opportunity. It triggered for us thinking about the community that we're part of and what are the institutions and organizations in this community that we as a couple value and that we don't want to take for granted. So a brief story. A very good friend of ours passed away about 10 days ago. His name is Emil Homerin, and Emil was a religion and classics professor at the university, and Emil and his wife Nora have been dear friends of ours for years. And a few days before Emil died, he wrote us a letter, and in the letter, Emil quoted an old teaching. And it was a saying that made a lot of sense to me, but I'd not heard it before. So some of you have probably heard it, some of you haven't. But Emil quoted this teaching that says, if you want to know what the world will look like when you're gone, look around now. And I've thought about that over and over these last few days. If you want to know what the world will look like when you're gone, look around. And so that's what life and legacy is about. It's about saying, don't take this world for granted. At some point, you were born into this world, or you moved to Rochester and you joined this world. But the Jewish institutions of Rochester preceded us, welcomed us, create a home for us. This temple, Temple Bethel, is a legacy of generations that came before us that in some sense has been given to us and given to us in trust to make sure this congregation is here even after we're gone. So what will our legacy be? Our legacy, at minimum, should be to make sure these institutions continue to thrive and stay alive. So again, if you're interested in joining me and Charles and all the other people who've made a commitment to life and legacy, all you need to do is sign a form that says you want to participate. You'll designate something. You don't need to ever tell how much that something's going to be. That's what Lador Vidor means, Rochester style. Shabbat Shalom.